Somewhere in the early episodes of this season, a teenage girl walked into town with her father, a priest, looking for nothing more than a fresh start. Nobody questioned it. She helped with chores. She sat with grieving families. She prayed with people who had nothing left to pray for. By every measure the show gave us, she was one of the good ones. Then the finale happened, and the people who make this show confirmed it directly in interviews. That girl was never a girl. She was the entity this entire series has been built around, wearing a disguise good enough to fool an entire town for months. Not a jump scare, a confirmed on-the-record confession about what Season 4 was actually doing the whole time. Once you know that, you cannot watch a single one of her scenes the same way again. So let's actually go through what that means, what the show has quietly confirmed about how this thing operates, and what all of it sets up for the final season. To understand what's really going on, you have to go back to the Season 3 finale, because that's when the show finally explained where the monsters came from. And it's uglier than a curse. Generations back, the original residents made a trade. In the dark, they handed over their own children in exchange for a promise that they would never die. The children the show refers to as the Enkui aren't random casualties. They're the payment. And the creatures that hunt the town at night are, per that same reveal, the descendants of the adults who made that trade, transformed by whatever they bargained with. Two of the show's most level-headed characters, Tabitha and Jade, were confirmed in that finale to be reincarnated versions of two of the original townspeople, a couple who tried to stop the sacrifice and failed. One of the children handed over that night was theirs. Sit with that for a second because it reframes everything. This isn't a town that got cursed by bad luck or proximity to something evil. It's a town built on one specific, unpaid debt made by specific people. And the entity running the show has spent generations pulling the same handful of connected souls back to keep settling it. The Man in Yellow's first real appearance lines up with that framing exactly. He shows up right after Jade's music draws the sacrificed children out of hiding, and the first thing he does is kill Jim Matthews, the character who had spent 3 seasons trying to reverse engineer the town's rules. That same episode also confirmed something fans had been chasing since Season 1. The voice that warned Jim over the radio not to let his wife dig a specific hole was the Man in Yellow all along. He's been managing this account since the very first episode. We just didn't have a name for him yet. Which brings us to Season 4's real bombshell, and it isn't a death, it's an identity. In post-finale interviews, the show's creator laid out exactly what the writing team built this season. The Man in Yellow moves into town to live among the residents disguised as a religious teenage girl who arrives with a father figure as cover. That girl is Sophia, confirmed, on the record, by the people who wrote her. Rewatch the season with that fact loaded in and almost everything recontextualizes. She wasn't just present for the town's plans, she was embedded inside them, close enough to know which rituals actually worked, which talismans mattered, which residents were the most vulnerable. Every scene where she seemed to understand the town's rules a little too well wasn't foreshadowing for later. It was reconnaissance, running in real time, in a body nobody thought to suspect, because nobody suspects the sweet new girl who prays with your grieving neighbors. Here's the detail I think deserves more attention than it's gotten. In the finale, when a character corners Sophia after finding an old photograph that looks exactly like her, she tells him directly that she can only inhabit the bodies of people who have already died in the town. That's not a throwaway line. That's the entity explaining its own operating rules out loud. Which raises a real wrinkle. If the rule is that strict, how does an entity bound to occupying the already dead pull off arriving as a brand new resident with a freshly invented backstory and a father in tow? Either Sophia was quietly someone who died in that town long before the season started and nobody clocked it, or the entity just bent a rule it swore was absolute. The show hasn't clarified which, and I don't think that's an accident. That's a loose thread Season 5 has to pick up. What we do know is that this thing doesn't just overpower people. It bargains, it earns access, and it waits. A being with unlimited power doesn't need a cover story that takes a full season to build. This one very clearly does, and that tells you more about its actual limits than any monster attack has. Here's a detail I think is getting undersold. In a recent fan Q&A, the show's creator and showrunner confirmed something that reframes the entire cast list. Most of the people in this town are, structurally speaking, incidental. Trapped, terrified, with completely real stakes on an individual level, but not actually connected to the original bargain. Only four characters are Jade, Tabitha, Miranda, and Victor. They're the ones who get the visions. They're the ones the story keeps circling back to, cycle after cycle. That reframes Victor's whole arc, especially this season. His sister Eloise has now been confirmed as permanently, actually dead, which means every version of her that Henry has been seeing was a manipulation, not a grief hallucination in the sentimental sense. Something has been using Victor's grief as a lever, specifically because Victor is one of the four souls that actually matters to whatever contract is still being enforced here. It's the same basic tactic as the Sophia disguise. Find what someone already trusts and let them do the damage to themselves. The rest of the town is essentially the environment this plays out in. But the actual contest, if that's even the right word for it, has only ever run between the entity and four specific, recurring souls who keep waking up in the same nightmare with no memory of how many times they've already lost it. Now for the other half of this, and the part of the finale I think is the real headline. Sophia offers a character named Elgin the exact same deal she'd previously made with another resident, Clara. Help her, and she'll send him home. Clara took that deal once. Elgin, standing in a diner, already knowing exactly who and what he's talking to, refuses. He prays instead. Sophia's reaction isn't disappointment. She grabs his hands and squeezes until he bleeds from the eyes and mouth, killing him on the spot. That's not just a brutal death for shock value. Look at the pattern. This entity operates on bargains. Somebody takes the deal, and that's the mechanism that's kept it winning for generations. Clara is proof the mechanism usually works. Elgin refusing it outright and meaning it is the first real crack we've actually seen on screen, which is what makes the finale's closing exchange land so differently than it might look at first. The boy in white, who across 4 seasons has never once forced an outcome, only ever warned people and positioned himself at the exact moment a choice was being made, tells Sophia flatly that the townspeople have the bones. She doesn't deny it. He follows it with a simple line. She's going to lose this time. She answers, I guess we'll see, and starts emptying every talisman in town into the tree with her own hands. People are reading that this time as trash talk. I don't think it is. I think it's an assessment, and the evidence for why he'd say it with any confidence is sitting right there in what just happened to Elgin. If this entity's power has always depended on people eventually taking the deal, then a soul that flatly refuses and dies rather than negotiate isn't just a sad loss. It's data the system has never had to process before. That's the real cliffhanger underneath the obvious one. Not what the bones do. Not where the talismans ended up. It's whether something that has operated the same way for generations even has a next move when the person on the other side of the table simply won't sit down. 2 more pieces of the finale are worth knowing because they're going to matter next season. Marielle, one of the show's steadier presences, dies when an earthquake knocks the protective talisman off the town clinic and one of the creatures gets inside. It's not Sophia's doing directly, it's a domino effect from the bottle tree coming down, which is its own kind of unsettling. Protection in this show isn't really safety, it's just a countdown with more steps. And Fatima, who spent the season pregnant under increasingly strange circumstances, completes a transformation into one of the creatures by the end of the episode. The show hasn't spelled out exactly what that means for her going forward, and neither will I, because I'd rather be honest about what's confirmed versus what's speculation. But given everything else this season just told us about disguises, bargains, and bodies that used to belong to someone else, I would not bet on that thread staying quiet for long. So, what do we actually know is coming, based on what the people making the show have said? Not fan guesswork. Production moved fast. Filming on the 5th and final season started in Nova Scotia less than 2 weeks after the season 4 finale aired, which for a show on this budget and schedule is unusually quick. MGM Plus hasn't announced a release date yet. Most projections point to sometime in 2027, though the gap between this show's seasons has quietly gotten longer with each one, so a slip into early 2028 wouldn't be shocking either. On substance, the creative team has confirmed a few specific threads. Julie's ability to relive and revisit moments in the town's timeline, something the show has been sitting on since her season 3 arc, is confirmed to actually get explained instead of quietly dropped. Victor's arc is explicitly framed around him finally accepting that his sister is gone for good, which, if the entity really has been leaning on the four connected souls specifically, tracks as exactly the kind of pressure point it would keep returning to. And the writers have said directly that the finale's closing scene existed specifically to confirm the man in yellow and the boy in white know each other, with history between them, setting up what one of the producers has openly called the endgame. The creator has also been upfront that not everything gets a bow on it. Some ambiguity is staying on purpose, because a show like this loses something if every shadow gets fully lit. But the big structural questions, what the town actually is, what the creatures are, why the lighthouse matters, are apparently getting real answers before this ends. Here's where all of this actually lands. This show has looked like a haunting for 4 seasons, because a haunted town is a genre everybody already knows how to watch. But a haunting doesn't need a disguise. It doesn't need to earn trust for months before it can touch what actually matters. It doesn't explain its own rules out loud to a man it's about to kill. What this town is running looks a lot more like an old contract nobody currently living actually signed, still being enforced against the handful of souls connected to the people who did sign it, by something patient enough to spend a full season pretending to be a grieving teenager just to get close enough to finish the job. The boy in white thinks something shifted this cycle. Somebody finally said no and meant it. Whether that's enough to actually change the outcome is the one thing even 4 seasons of buildup can't answer yet. That's what Season 5 has to settle, and for the first time, it sounds like even the people writing it agree we're finally close to finding out. If you want the full rewatch breakdown of exactly which Season 4 scenes read differently once you know who Sophia really is, that's the next one. Subscribe if you want to be here when it goes up.